Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. One of the ongoing topics that we cover here in Security Breach is ransomware attacks, the vulnerabilities that allow for them to be successful, mitigation strategies, and the growing complexity of the bad actors behind these attacks. The risk of continually discussing a topic is that it can become like white noise. It's always present, but it's in the background, and potentially it's easier to dismiss. Well, if that's the case, recent findings from Dragos' 2022 Cybersecurity Year in Review should help to reorient your perspective. The report indicates that ransomware attacks against industrial organizations increased 87% last year, and over 70% of all ransomware attacks were directed towards manufacturers. Additionally, the number of ransomware groups who decided to join the fray in attacking industrial control systems and operational technologies within manufacturing facilities increased by 35%. Dragos also found that the leading sectors being attacked, in order, were metalworking, automotive, electronics and semiconductors, building materials, and industrial equipment and supplies. Now, just imagine the kind of havoc that could be created by throwing yet another disruption into the supply chains of these sectors, which is probably why most of those experiencing a ransomware attack end up paying. And Dragos is forecasting that 2023 will see more new ransomware groups materialize, and they will continue to stalk the industrial sector. The interconnectivity associated with production, the interdependent nature of these supply chains, and the critical significance of the products being generated usually result in higher or more frequent payouts. Before we talk to our guest for this episode, we're excited to announce that Security Breach is being sponsored by Rockwell Automation. For more information on their cybersecurity solutions, you can go to rockwellautomation.com. And here to discuss some of the new concerns and solutions surrounding ransomware attacks is Wil Klusovsky, Avertium's Chief Security Architect. Avertium is a leading provider of cybersecurity strategy, response, and compliance solutions. Wil, thanks so much for joining us today. I know you guys have been tracking kind of a new player on the ransomware side of things. What can you tell us about Ransom House, what they're up to, maybe some of their tactics?
Yeah, sure. Glad to be here. First off, thanks. It's interesting. They're called Ransom House, so most people would think they're deploying ransomware in those typical manners, but they're not really. First off, they're advertising that they don't use ransomware. What they are doing is, and typically with ransomware, you find the easiest way to get it deployed through a phishing email or something, the path of least resistance.
Yep.
This organization is actually looking at the vulnerabilities in the via the network application layer, all the traditional sort of pen testing ways of doing business. So, and then they when they breach through those vulnerabilities, then they grab all the data that's worth something, and instead of locking it all up, so like a typical ransomware would, they actually exfiltrate it. So, but they don't sell it right away. They will reach out to the organization and let them know, hey, we've got your data. You can pay for it, and we'll give it back to you. And they even have this guarantee. It's all very corporate as it looks at it. They even give you like a findings report that says, hey, here's the vulnerabilities we used and how to fix it all. So the difference there being, it seems a lot more like in white hat, gray hat individuals who maybe got fed up with being told there wasn't enough budget, or we can't patch all of these machines, we can't do a vulnerability management program the right way, and so they've kind of taken matters into their own illegal hands. That's kind of what a lot of organizations we suspect that's kind of what's driving behind it, their activities. But then if you do pay, then you get your data back, and they delete it. But I gotta wonder, how much of a guarantee that actually goes to. It's pretty unique and different way of going about it.
So are they targeting a certain type of data? Are they going after IP? Are they going after personal information? What kind of stuff are they literally going after?
I don't think the data they're going after is they're going after whatever the company finds value in. It seems that their motives are more tied to getting that organization to recognize that they have problems. In fact, one of the things they'll do if you don't pay is essentially they'll put it out. They'll try to sell the data on the dark web to get something out of it. If they can't, they'll just do public humiliation, right? So they're really bent on making these organizations admit to having security vulnerabilities and not doing anything about it.
So just to play devil's advocate here, not trying to defend any of these types of activities, but are they kind of trying to help people out? Are they trying to help some of these network administrators out and say, hey, look, we found this stuff. It could be worse. Be grateful it's just us and we're trying to work with you here.
I mean, as much as it makes sense to hack a company and then say, hey, look how good I am, you should hire me, right? I mean,
yeah.
and I've heard those stories of where people will do that. And I think they again, there does seem to be some level of, fed upness, if I can make up a word. They're just trying to, So, most of those of us in the security space, we never condone any illegal activity, and especially because it can cause a lot of harm with what they're doing. But they're trying to find a different way to send a message for sure.
It's interesting. Do you think their tactics help them get paid more quickly because they do kind of send out that report and all that?
I actually personally, I kind of question. I would like to see the data. I don't know that we have it. I'm curious as to how many people pay. Right. The thing behind real traditional ransomware is business stops. Right. You can't do anything else.
Yeah.
We saw what happened with Colonial Pipeline when ransomware goes. It's a big impact. Me threatening that I have some of your data is only as valuable as you think of it. And in today's landscape where, you look at all of the big major breaches, I mean, every company's had one, their shares may dip a little bit, and in fact, I saw a recent statistic that said consumer prices, I say customers pricing, working with organizations who have been breached tend to go up. Right. To compensate. So a lot of times businesses are passing down the problem down to their customers. So I don't know how many would actually be paying because they may not feel like it doesn't matter, even if they get publicly blasted on the dark web. Right.
Interesting. You mentioned that Ransom House in particular is really identifying certain vulnerabilities and then exploiting them. In your experience in working with folks, especially in the industrial sector, are there repeat vulnerabilities that you're seeing? Is there sort of some things that just continue to pop up that just aren't getting addressed?
I mean, the industrial sector is very unique, especially in the last 10 years, maybe at least 5 to 7 years. There was a time I can remember when we didn't have things like IoT and OT security tools, right? The shop floor was pretty much ignored because, it's air gapped, and there's nothing there we don't need, right? And then we would do, when that 1 in a million times somebody would let you pen test an ICS system, you would find out it's not air gapped and it's actually connected to your network. And now, those are traditional organizations that have, flat networks. They're working very minimalistically, even on the enterprise corporate side of things. And now you have, you find out that your shop floor is actually connected, and now you've got all of this vulnerability that exists that you didn't know about before. So I think, what I see a lot is organizations just not having a plan. A lot of people tend to think about technology first, like, I need this thing to help fix this thing, and not step back and take a big picture at where do my risks actually sit so that I can spend my money on the right areas at the right time.
Makes sense. You got to circle back real quick. I always ask everybody this when it comes to ransomware. Where do you stand in terms of making that payment? You said a lot of these guys, you're not sure if they are, but in the industrial sector, a lot of that data is so critical and the products that are being put out the door are so critical. What's your stance? Do you pay these guys or not?
I think we're already starting to see, legislation may be the wrong word for it, but we're starting to see a trend in regulatory bodies and kind of saying you can't do that, or if you do, that hurts. I can imagine, in fact, I'm meeting with some insurance companies here to kind of get into that a little bit. I can imagine if you pay the ransomware, that could have insurance implications. So I think the industry itself is doing what it can so that people don't pay it, because the problem is, organizations need to realize that, having a ransomware, having any kind of breach still requires cleanup. So, the fear is, okay, you pay the ransomware, you unlock it. That's great. You can get back to work. The pipes are flowing, whatnot. But do you really know if the baddies are gone, right? Are you able to go in there and check everything out so that they can't just do it again, or go steal the data that you don't see because you have really bad security anyway, and now they're just going to exfiltrate it and sell it anyway, right? So I think it's a bad idea to pay because of that without doing the right thing, but time will tell.
You know what? It's an interesting point you bring up. You don't know if they're gone or not. We've heard a lot more, especially in these ICS, where there's really a lot of dormant threats. Well, they'll sit there for a long time where you may not even realize they're there, and they're just siphoning data out until they actually want to, go forward and do their big purge. What are you seeing there? Are you seeing more of that, or what's the best way to address that type of situation or defend against it?
Yeah, that's kind of the long play versus the quick play, and that's kind of where Ransom House separates themselves from sort of the traditional. It's very easy for an individual with minimal talent to go out and purchase some ransomware, craft a decent phishing email, and get it deployed. It's a very, just to get a quick, we used to joke when in the early days of ransomware, especially small businesses, that, your biggest risk is some kid who wants to buy an Xbox. Just knowing that this is an easy way to get, $500-$700. But now it's like, oh, look, we can lock up these big organizations with it. So, the dormant side of things, sort of the sneaky red team type of stuff, is a, I don't say much larger threat, but it's a significant threat, right? Because they are going to sit in there and exfiltrate. And so they will look and see, what are the crown jewels? Organizations don't realize how important their IP is until it's stolen. A lot of organizations will have something taken from them and think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I think even as individuals in our personal privacy, a lot of times we don't think about how one little piece of the puzzle matters. Anybody can go and Google China building an airplane and look at how that happened. Steal a little bit from each of these defense contractors, and now you can build this, new great piece of technology, and it didn't cost you anything, right? So there's implications beyond that company's own necessities.
Yeah, it's interesting, and Ransom House is kind of an example how a lot of these ransomware organizations, or the ransomware as a service type of outfit, is really evolving and becoming more complex. As that's the case, do you think there's been a transition from some of these vulnerabilities in the industrial sector going from, well, this is just opportunistic, I'm just sort of probing for soft spots and I found something, or are they targeting things because they know typically where they can find those soft spots?
I think it's interesting if we go back to the onset of IoT, OT security devices and that technology coming about. I would bet there was a large group of baddies that didn't think about attacking that way until somebody came up and created a way to protect it, right? Yeah. So I definitely feel like those organizations are targeted, right? You're going to go after a targeted attack. The manufacturing sector is usually in the top 1 to 3 for being targeted every year, depending on what report you look at. They're also one of the sectors that has the least amount of funding and the least maturity. So they're an easy target. And again, for them, IP is a big deal. So being able to protect that intellectual property, and some organizations were like, sometimes your pricing is your IP, right? Maybe you don't make anything great, but how you contract and do pricing could, if somebody else got your price sheets, what would that do to your business, right? So there's varying levels of what intellectual property can be. And then now myself and many other professionals you'll see are predicting that you're going to start to see weaponized IoT, OT now. I know when I first thought about, hey, if I could get access into a manufacturing facility, what would be the worst thing I could do? And a lot of people were like, oh, I can mess up this recipe, or I can turn off the pipes. I'm like, no, you can change that PSI setting on that gauge so that I can overpower it and start throwing bolts. And now you can hurt people. Yeah. Now you can hold people hostage. You have real, take ransomware to a whole nother level or cause bodily harm. So, they're definitely being targeted for their maturity, as well as, what risks exist.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, when you talk about those types of attacks, when you talk about industrial control systems, a lot of those are used in utilities. And I know wastewater facilities in particular are really a target right now, because it does, you alluded to, it doesn't take a whole lot to have a huge impact at a facility like that. So definitely very scary. So Wil, we've talked a lot about the bad guys. Let's talk about some of the good guys here. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your company, Avertium, some of the things that you folks are doing to help support the industrial sector.
Yeah, sure. We're a full scope security company. So we do everything on the consulting side, all the way through the managed services side. So we can help you on that advisory, strategic, CISO level, compliance-based stuff, help you with the technology itself, the design implementation, and then the run part, managing and evolving it over time. So yeah, a lot of, I have a large customer base that sits in that manufacturing space. Being able to get that IoT, OT technology is great. Being able to, like I said, one of the biggest things that we're seeing is organizations not having a plan, right? The poor CISO's got a budget and doesn't know where to spend it. Let's help them make sure, with the limited amount of money that they have, what they can be doing with that money to make the most impact. And then again, we're seeing a lack of resources, regardless of how much money your organization has, filling those gaps. Working with consultants and working with managed services providers, partners like us, helps alleviate that cost. It's way easier to just, for us to pay for a service to manage that security of your organization than it would be to hire and maintain and keep all those people engaged and care enough. We have slews of firewall engineers, and the effort it takes for, most organizations just to get one or two on board and keep them happy is less significant, right?
Well, that's an interesting point too you bring up, and maybe you can comment on this a little bit from your perspective too. We don't have enough IT security professionals out there right now. It seems like we talk about in the manufacturing sector, we don't have enough skilled labor. There's a skills gap. There's a knowledge gap. Same thing is happening on the IT security side of things. From your perspective, and also trying to hire and support a lot of your customers, what are some things that you've seen in terms of addressing that problem, or just how real is it for you guys?
Yeah, the reality is there. I think every podcast panel conversation I'm on, the topic comes up. The problem is there's multiple reasons. It's everybody's fault. I'll put it that way, right? Businesses who need to hire for one role. They need to not be taking, we grew up in a world where a lot of the security folks were already senior in some, they had some experience and kind of moved into security. We've got into positions where a certain level of experience is required. And so we kind of negated we overcomplicated those roles. So you got Bob who does, 15 things. It should be 3 people doing it. He quits and they try to replace him with that one unicorn, right? So you have that problem of even being able to, finding that person. So we need to, from the hiring side, we need to tailor down our job descriptions and understand what that role needs to be doing. The recruiting organization needs to be better about it. They need to understand how to recruit. That's both internally and externally. And then we, as just an industry, need to embrace entry-level staff. We really need to get people. There's a ton of people who want to transition into security who have other skills that are very transferable. I was able to hire in the past a guy who was working in healthcare for decade, and then realized there was a gap in cybersecurity. I'm like, that's great. You need to come over, and we need to build that. I use the farm system analogy a lot of the times. If you know anything about American baseball, most people go into the farm system. Not everybody that gets drafted ends up playing in the major leagues, and if they do, very rarely is it for the team that drafted them. But the whole organization, the whole Major League Baseball benefits from that because we're all feeding that farm system. And for the longest time, we haven't. So there's some delusions on the hiring side of how experienced someone needs to be. We need to start looking at hiring for capability. And that involves senior positions too. If all you have to offer somebody is, hey, I see you're doing this job here, come do it for us. It's the exact same job. We'll give you more money. Money's not the only thing, right?
Yeah.
You need to say, hey, we need you to do this, and here's 3 other things that are better and help you elevate and get more skill, and you can challenge yourself. That's how we need to do it, and stop looking to sort of just fill the role.
No, it makes a ton of sense. One of the things you've alluded to a couple times here are developing that cybersecurity plan. So in looking at the industrial sector, I think we have really the haves and the have-nots. We've got a lot of folks who think they're too small for this to matter. They're not on any hacker's radar screen. So a cybersecurity plan, that can wait till tomorrow. Then I think you've also got the larger enterprises who say we have something in place. And once they have it in place, maybe it's not reviewed as frequently as it could be. We see so much Industry 4.0 technology and so much more connectivity coming into the production scheme that even something as simple as inventorying all the APIs and all the connections becomes an issue. So I know that's 2 ends of the spectrum here a little bit, but if you could offer some advice in terms of really looking at either establishing or refining that cyber plan What would be your take?
I'd say you need to take a risk-based approach. So looking, and that goes across both the enterprise and sort of the OT ICS side of the house, right? Understanding that, where are your most, I always say, don't put laser beams in the air ducts if you're leaving your front door unlocked, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got to be smart about what you spend your money on. That's really what it comes down to. And the only way to do that is to take in a serious evaluation of what your business does, where your risks actually lie. And then that's part technical, part business side of the house, right? As to saying, how vulnerable is this? How likely is someone to exploit this? Okay, it's worth protecting with, this much investment. It's interesting, in the early days of sort of IoT, OT security, you would go to some of the, like you said, the haves and the haves would have all of this technology on their corporate side. The email would be all locked down, but then the whole manufacturing, facility was just wide open and unprotected. But as soon as you go and ask, hey, what makes all your money here? They're like, well, that over there. And what are you protecting? This over here. Okay, well, you need to align those things. So that's the biggest part, I think.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Excuse me. One of the things that we're seeing more in a lot of these plans too is what I think even on your website, you talk about the human factor, the human element of security planning. Maybe you could walk us through your perspective in terms of maybe tailoring the plan to the user and the people that you need to execute these plans, as opposed to putting something in place and making them adapt their behaviors to it.
Right. Yeah, that's very, very important, especially with things that are big change. So if you look at, say implementing a data protection program, right? If you have an organization that's never used labeling, they don't have, classification, they're not used to being told they can or can't do something because this data, just turning that on without any kind of training is going to create resistance, right? So when implementing a lot of these technologies, you also have to do a good level of organizational change management. And a lot of times you've got to pilot things and roll the thing out and kind of get everybody used to it. And that's good because you want to create a security aware organization anyway. When you talk about the human element, again, on the scale of things, it's one of the most frequently exploited. It's also one of those things that if you have good security training, sort of general bucket there, it's going to reduce the cost of your breach. And really what it comes down to is having people understand that security is yes, it's everybody's job, but also where they fit in and why you're doing the things you're doing and how it affects them. Going back to, well, I'm just, I'm just an administrator, or I'm just, a shop floor, but it doesn't matter what I do and the data I have isn't important. You don't realize you're a piece of that puzzle that's really important. So I think that human element is super important in changing the organization and creating that mindset. And then we've seen the data's out there. You can't just do training once a year. You can't just do 30 minutes once a year. You've got to be doing it at a regular basis, regular interval, and you kind of have to tailor it too. So, and a lot of the newer programs and technology around training your employees have recognized that and are implementing it in that way too. So that companies just need to adopt it and do it that way also.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of different factors out there impacting cybersecurity, a lot of things getting in the way. Obviously, the things in Russia and Ukraine are having a big impact globally. It's impacting industrial control systems as well. So as you look at all those different factors and things going on, what do you think are going to be some of the bigger trends, maybe over the next year, 18 months or so, that people need to be aware of in developing or refining their cybersecurity defenses?
Yeah, as we look to the next year and a half, obviously, like I said, the weaponization of IoT, OT, taking that threat seriously, I think is very important. The other thing we didn't I think you hit on it a little bit is, we're getting to edge compute and 5G, and there's a lot more happening, in the mine now, or on that vehicle or with that radio, and so there's a lot more of that getting pushed out. For utilities, physical security and all of those, multiple locations has always been very important, but also realizing now that access to those facilities or to that vehicle, I think physical security and that whole like 5G / physical security side of the house is going to become more relevant. Being able to, I consulted with a company who was doing some radio frequency, security stuff, and going from the cloud to the device. And so there's this whole other area around that that's going to become relevant. And then I think again in the OCS, ICS space, data protection, I think is another big one. Because traditionally, that industrial sector hasn't always had to worry about that area. And the technology has kind of come a long way. And with data privacy regulations coming out and continuing to come out, and they're not going to stop, it's just going to get worse, and you're going to have to manage that. That's, I think, something we're going to start to see snowball over time, because that's another one of those things where if it's not implemented properly, it's not going to be done. And at least in the EU, they're handing out fines like crazy. So,
no, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the privacy stuff and how that's going to continue to evolve and have an impact. Will, this has been fantastic. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
No, it's great. Have a risk-based approach. Everybody wants to hurry up and get the technology in place. And I can guarantee you, if you stop and take a few minutes to think about the plan and how you're going to have security be part of that new cool technology thing you want to do, it's going to be way easier. I think the stats like 70% of, I think it's applications specifically, if they try to shove security in after the fact, it doesn't work. So be proactive. You feel like it's going to take longer, but it won't. It's probably going to be more successful.
Thanks, Will. And for more information on the work Avertium does, you can check them out at www.avertium.com. Thanks for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Wil Klusovsky, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.